sort of orthographic view. We're basically making a 2D game despite the fact that we're in a 3D engine. So that's going to be kind of cool. A lot of people look to make 2D games here. Can you get a retro feel using a 3D engine? Of course you can, and that's what we're going to pull off here. So we have a cube, which is fantastic. We are also going to need a palette to control, either what you want to call it. We're going to also make this a cube. I'm going to center it to start off with. And then I'm going to lower it down to the bottom of the screen. Shadows are definitely going to be a problem. You know what? This light, well, there's a couple of options. I guess I could just increase the radius for now. You know, it's actually just kind of hard to see. For development purposes, we'll see if we can't make some prettier lights later on. We're going to use a directional light. Now I understand what the problem is. The problem is all the objects have the exact same texture, so when we're looking at it flat front, the objects start to disappear. So we're going to look at materials now. We are going to create in our project, well, first things, you know what, we haven't even saved anything in this scene yet. Let's go ahead and save the current scene. It's going to ask for a name for the scene. This is going to be level 1. And there you can see in our project, we now have a level 1. We're also going to go ahead and create a material. It's going to be a very simple material. This is going to be our brick material. And we are going to color it. There's not going to be a texture. We could, if we wanted to, take some time at this point to find ourselves a nice bricky type texture, or maybe even draw it ourselves, but I'm simply going to color it. I'm going to say that our bricks should be a sort of maybe a brownish color. That sounds like a brick. And I'm going to create another material in our project called, this is our paddle material. And I'm going to pick something, I don't know, kind of bright and garish purple for that. So it's going to be completely visible. So at this point, we actually have two things in here called cube. Well, that won't do it all. So let's take our first cube, and in the inspector, we're going to rename it brick. And we're going to rename our second cube paddle. And you're going to see at some point these names, there's kind of a collision that's going to be going on here. Well, not an actual collision, but it's not going to make sense. These are materials, and they have the same name as the objects, so that could be a little bit confusing. There's a couple of different ways we can organize it. We could rename these things instead to be matte brick. That's pretty popular. A lot of people like to do that. And then the advantage of it is that alphabetically speaking, whoops, they're all going to be grouped up. The other thing you can do is just create folders as well. So we're going to create a folder for materials, and we're going to stick both those guys in there. So I'm actually going to use both techniques, which is what I usually do. Now, so we have our brick, and we want to give it this material. All we have to do is drag and drop. So I'm going to take this brick, I can drop it here, I can drop it on the object itself. You can see you even get a preview, and I can also drop it in the hierarchy. Anything you'd like. Bam. So now our bricks are colored using matte brick, which we can look at the different shaders and colors and different ways of doing things later on. But for now, we just need to be able to see our stuff. And for the paddle, I'm going to drop it right here, just to compare. There we go. So now we can actually see our objects. Obviously, this is not appropriate for the paddle in any way whatsoever. We need to have the paddle be wider, so on the X scale. I'm going to make it a nice wide paddle, very easy to use. Doesn't need to be quite as tall. Let's give it a half size, and there we go. And the thickness of it, we're going to leave as is. Again, we won't be able to see the thickness in our camera, so it doesn't matter at all. And we're going to keep everything consistent because at a certain point, we're going to want our physics to kind of make sense. And we're going to get to that very soon. I'm going to move it to the bottom of the screen. You can already kind of picture that, yeah, it's going to kind of work. In fact, what we can do at this point, let me flip the camera around so I'm looking at the front from here. Let me take this one brick. I'm going to duplicate it. So you can see here, the duplicate option is Control D. So now I have two bricks. I'm going to take the one I have selected. I'm going to move it 2 units to the left. And then I'm going to copy things again. I'm going to move it 2 units to the right. So now I have an array of 3 bricks. 1, 2, 3. And actually, I'm going to take all these and duplicate them again and move them up. Now, what happens if I decide that there needs to be some sort of inherent changes to the bricks? Maybe I don't like the fact that they're 2 by 1. I want them to be 3 by 1. I want them to be wider. Or maybe I want them to be thinner in height. I want them to be half height, just like the paddle, because I think the paddle is so incredibly sexy. Well, obviously, I'm just changing one. Well, that's not optimal. Then I got to go through and change all of them. I don't want to do that. No. Let's take all these bricks. I'm just holding Control down here to multi-select. I'm going to get rid of these extra ones. I'm going to take this first brick, and I'm going to turn it into what's called a prefab, fabricated object. And there's a couple of different ways of doing it. The easiest by far is to take the brick from the hierarchy, drag it into the project, bam. now I have a brick prefab object over here. You can also create an empty prefab and then sort of drag objects into it, but this is the easiest way of doing it. So now we have kind of a master brick. And the brick, I don't know if you could see on YouTube here, but this brick text is actually a blue, a very light blue, or I guess it's a dark blue actually. I just mean to say not a very visible blue, but it indicates that it's actually an asset. And if we click on the object either here or there, you can see, or it's an asset, it's a prefab. You can see there's an extra line here for the prefab, which allows you to quickly select that prefab. And also, if you make changes to this object, you can have them reapplied to the base prefab by clicking apply. So for now, what we can do is, again, we can duplicate this and move the position to -2, and duplicate this one and go +2. Oops, I didn't actually duplicate it correctly. That's okay, I can take this one and move it to 0. And then I'm going to take all 3 of these, like so, duplicate them, and move them up by 1. And now, if I use any of these and change the scale, I think it's only going to change the 1, and it does. If I undo this, if I go to the prefab and I make a change here, you'll see it affects all of them. Likewise, if I were to take one of these, make a change to 0.5 and decide, yeah, that looks bad, I could revert it to the original prefab, or I could decide it looks good and apply it to the prefab, and now they all have it. And I can also go undo, undo, and I'm back to here, which is where I want to be. So I've got a group of 6 bricks, I've got 1 paddle. Next thing I need, obviously, is a ball. So we're going to go and create other. We are going to create a sphere, which I'm going to go right ahead and rename as ball. And now I have a ball on the screen, and if I rotate around, well, let's zero everything out. And let's look at it directly from the side here. So that's the front, this is the side. Oh, it's inside the, where's the ball? There it is. It's inside the brick, so we look down. You can see, yeah, it's going to line up perfectly fine that way. And if we go back to the front, everything looks good. Let's move it down a little bit here. And of course, if I play right now, absolutely nothing's going to happen. None of these objects have been physics enabled yet. And most of them won't be. In fact, the only thing that we may need to enable to be live with physics here is the ball itself. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to go into Components, Physics, and add a rigid body controller to the ball. And if we hit play, it's going to be affected by gravity and come down and stop. All right, that's very exciting. We need to make a couple other changes. First of all, we actually don't want this ball to be affected by gravity in any way, but we're going to leave that on for now. In classic Breakout games, it is pure non-friction. It just bounce, 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 bounce. It can bounce around forever until it falls off the bottom of the screen. It's not. It doesn't. Gravity doesn't actually apply. We can turn it off here. The other option is we can go into the Edit menu, go to Project Settings, and Physics. And on here, we can actually change the gravity for the entire simulation. We could just set this to 0 and nothing would be affected by gravity. Or rather, everything would be affected by gravity, but the gravity would be 0, so it wouldn't matter at all. But that seems like kind of a backwards way of going about things when all we want to do is the ball. It's easy to envision that we might want various particle effects, or when we break the brick, maybe it'll break into pieces and they will fall down in a very sort of gravity-like way. So really it's just the ball that we're going to want immune to it. I'm going to leave it on for right now while we mess around a few things. The first thing we noticed, probably when you hit play, this ball, there's not really any bounce to it, and we really need